Hello, everyone. Welcome to the City of Healing, where the city resides within. This is Sinette Ventura Angela, and I have some resin with some charcoal that's smoking over there. But anyway, welcome to the City of Healing. This is Sinette Ventura Angela, and I wanted to come forth just to do a brief share and just touch the surface of a very interesting topic, which I found very interesting ever since I was a little girl. And that being, what happens to us, what happens to you, what happens to me when we die, when it's our time to die, to shed this physical form. What happens to who we really are? Where do we go? What happens? Who are we then? And this has been a very fascinating topic ever since I was a little girl. I used to talk about it a lot. I talked about it so much. I had to talk to some psychiatrists and some guidance counselors as to why I was talking about it so much and why it was important for me to talk about and figure out what it was, what it wasn't, etc., etc. And I believe, it sparked when my mother died. And all of us have some experience with death, and some have to experience death earlier than others. But I was very curious, even though I don't remember a lot from the funeral. One of the other things that I do remember, which I did share, is that even though her body was in that coffin, I still got the sense was, hey, that is not her there in that coffin. So where is she? That part I was not able to get in touch with, other than the experience that I shared before, we knew about her death. So what happens to us when we die? And to be honest, I don't know. I've never died. I don't have any experience with near-death experiences. I really don't know. I've only can theorize. I only can speculate. I only can share some ideas, but I think it's important to have the discussion, because a lot of us fear, that's so morbid to talk about it, and we fear it, but we all have to go through it. And it's such a process of going through the process and understanding the phases that, we have to go through ourselves. To try to get over our loved ones and experience that, the death brought to the family or the friend, or et cetera, et cetera. I know that, from that experience that I had, of just not necessarily missing my mother at the time, because I did not know a lot about her. But the process of knowing where she was, whether I'm gonna see her again, why did this have to happen, etc., etc. There were all things going on in my head, and I talked about it, not only her death, but other people's death, what was gonna happen to me, what was gonna happen to, etc., etc. Because I knew that all of us had to go through that experience instead of fearing it. And most people, on average, don't necessarily feel or fear the unknown, but they fear the unknown of how they're going to have to approach death. Is there going to be pain? Is there going to be fear? That's the greatest thing, but we're still not talking about it. Even though in old times, when we didn't have the technology, the medicine, etc., that we had now, people were dying quicker, of different illnesses that we're not dying of now. And in some instances, they have very short lifespans, as when now we're getting to live longer because they won't let us die. There's so much technology and learning how not to die that we're living, in some instances, longer. So I just thought that was very interesting. We don't understand death because we're not experiencing it. We're not talking about it as much. So this is just touching the surface, because there are so many layers to understanding death that, it's probably going to take more videos, and I don't really want this video to be too long, but definitely something to consider, I would say. And a very important thing also to understand is that as in life, we go through different stages of life, from being born to being an infant, to being a baby, to being a toddler, school age, young adult, etc., etc. So in death, there are stages to death. And speaking of that, I can only touch on some of my experiences as a nurse is dealing with death. And not only dealing with death of the patient, but my own emotions and being vulnerable to the situation and helping family members. It's always different. You never get used to it. I don't prepare myself to get used to it, because every situation is different. Some of the patients you know longer, some of it's sudden, and you have to adjust yourself and still do the job. And we do, and we still have to have the emotions to understand that family members also need to accept and, prepare the body. If you knew the patient, sometimes that's difficult. And with that process, I've learned that, not only learn, I began to learn that there's stages of death. And as we know, when you die, your heart stops and there's no brain activity, but there's still life in your body. It's a process that your body and your organs die as well. And the last things to go that we heard is hearing. So when someone dies, it's very cautious, very important and cautious that you be cognizant of the words and the things that you say. If you're going to sing, you can sing. If you're going to talk, you can talk. Also, I think one of the last things to go is the sense of touch, especially on the soles of your hands and your shoulders and your upper arms. I still feel that there are feelings still left. And this is why I believe that, in some cultures, we wait like 5 to 7 days before a person dies. I think we got that from ancient Egypt or Africa, because in ancient Egypt, months go by before they actually have to show the body, before it goes through different phases of death, as well as different ways of preparing the different organs and the body and mummification before it can be presented and ready for burial, because they knew that there was a process to dying. And even in Africa now, they do that as well. But we do it here, some of us, and we wait 5 to 7 days. And I do know this to be true, because in some funerals that I've been to, not many of which this happened, maybe 1 or 2, I felt the essence of that person not able to totally transcend or move from the body experience for whatever reason. But you can still feel that energy or the essence of that person still there. And it's not, the person is definitely, as we know it, died, from no heart, no brain activity. But something is still there. And perhaps, I don't remember if they were buried too soon, or if that person was not ready to leave the body. I'm not sure, but you can still definitely tell the essence of that person. The spirit is still within that body. So I think that's very important to know, that there are stages to death. Just because someone don't have any brain activity, or we don't think that they have heart activity, there's still a process to it. Also, when I was younger, I wanted to be a brain surgeon, because I felt the brain is what really controls the body. Before I really know, that's another subject as well. But I wanted to be a brain surgeon to understand and help people change their mind about life and their being. But, I've learned most recently, not too recently, but the brain and the mind are two different things. And the brain is basically a conductor, it's electric, it's an organ of the body, and the mind is over that, and it sparks the mind. The best way I can explain that is sort of like when you light a match and you set the match to a wood, and then it produces a flame, which is basically a metaphor for the mind. And it has different stages and phases of that. Of course, you have the subconscious mind and the conscious mind, the ka, the ba, etc., etc. That's, like I said, has many layers to it as well. So that's something to consider, that the mind and the body are, no, not the body, but the mind and the brain are two different things, but yet, they still can interact. They do interact. And also, I found very interesting as well is that, people know in some instances that they are going to die. I've had that people mention that and come to me and talk to me, I don't think I have this much longer to live. And usually they say it's about 2 years. People are talking about death a lot. In some instances, some people are talking about it for years and years and years, just preparing themselves and others for death. But usually, on the most part, it's like 2 years they're preparing themselves. And some people may talk about having visitors, talking about death angels and family members. And this is just a conversation, but not the actual bedside death angel there. That's a different phase as well. But some people get this knowing about their passing, and they actually talk about it, and that's important to actually be more cognizant of. And we don't talk about death a lot because we fear it, because we don't understand it, and we will never understand it. And some people talk about near-death experiences, but I think that's totally separate. I think it's the preliminary to what death really is. No one has really died and come back, really. It's just near-death experiences. It's a process. You haven't gone the full spectrum of what death really is. And there's so much to say and understand. So, that's just like, I believe, knowing it's sort of a symbolism of what the purpose of life. We all say the purpose of life is learning the lesson. The lesson of what, right? The purpose of death is knowing, perhaps, my opinion, is how to get back into the union of the all of the universe, not just Earth, not just Jupiter, Mars, and the galaxy, but with everything, becoming one with everything. But we have so many attachments, attachments to our bodies. That's why some people, I've seen it, they struggle with the dying process when they know that they're dying and they're on the deathbed, and they're so confused and they're so violent. And it's very hard for them to just let go, but, really understanding that people sometimes have difficulties letting go of attachments and not completing the task that they felt that they needed to complete while they were here on this physical plane. But we have those attachments to people and places, our homes, our cars. People struggle with that in the end. And that's why sometimes it's so difficult to transcend or pass over to the other side because of those attachments. And I feel I will be attached to, my children, my mother, my father. I will have trouble with that too. Until, you come into the conclusion that we are the all. We are already the mother, the sister, the children, the house. We are all that, everything. And once we can let go of the everything else, the physical, the separate that's outside of us, then only then will we be able to actually understand that. And I think that's just the first layer of understanding and creating the conversation about becoming the oneness, really becoming the oneness with the essence once we leave this physical form. And as the ancient Egyptians, they had the book of the dead, but which is really the book of life, really, because in essence, and it's not really morbid, we should just really prepare to die while we live, because death is much longer than life. You know, even though life is something that we're supposed to be here to enjoy, a part of that aside, we have to prepare for the ultimate appointment, but we still can enjoy and learn the lessons as well. But preparing for the appointment is even more important, not fearing it. You know, the Book of the Dead or the Book of the Living, written by Tahuti, or whatever you wish to call them, is very profound, because it takes us in part through some of the journey of death that we must come in culmination with. And I think the ancient Egyptians had a beautiful way. And of course, you know, believe it or not, there's other traditions and cultures too that approach it the same but different way as well, that they feel is the truth as well, believe it or not. But it's a beautiful process of learning the different stages of going into the underworld, meeting Osiris and Anubis and weighing the heart to a feather, etc., etc., is a very interesting concept of learning about the afterlife experience. Yes. Learning to die while we live is a perfect example of that. Our hospice patients or terminally ill patients that come to the conclusion that they are going to die sooner, and it's basically in front of your face and you really have to deal with it. And in the end, they learned, when speaking to some, that they have to be able to let go of everything else physical from this body, and they must learn to be with the ultimate universal God, which is really beyond our comprehension. The word is not even God that we call this great being that actually really is, because in the end you will have to come to that conclusion yourself. But learning to die while you live with hospice patient is the greatest example of knowing that you have to become one and let go of everything. And my personal experience with that is, as I shared before, was with a friend of mine, my high school crush from the 7th grade. Well, not recent now, but a couple of years ago, we got back in touch with each other, and we formed a short relationship. And he did mention that he had colon cancer at the time, but I decided that I wanted to continue on with the relationship. But he didn't really, and we had a wonderful time, but he did not want to talk too much about the cancer part of it, and he didn't. But he did share with me some things about dying, and he did not, in conclusion, want to continue the relationship. He gave other reasons, but I've come to the conclusion after he ended, without my consent as well, he ended the relationship, and the only type of connection I had was, going through Facebook wondering what went on with them. And one day, it was February the 15th, this was a couple of years ago, I had this urge to go buy this white candle, and I needed a cover for it. So that morning I just woke up, I was like, I gotta get a white candle, and and I wasn't really thinking about him at the time. And I wanted this case to carry it in. So I went out and I found one, I got it, I decorated my fireplace and put it on there. And that night I lit it, and I was in the dark in the living room, and I just sat there in the dark looking at the candle. A couple of weeks went by, and I looked on his Facebook page, and I saw one of his family members mention that he had passed away on February 15th, which was the same day that I had lit this candle. And I wasn't really even thinking about him at all that day. But sometimes when there is an emotional attachment, sometimes you get spiritual messages. Just like I mentioned, with my mother before, that's a long story, so I won't get into that. But sometimes when you have this emotional attachment, or that person has emotional attachment to you, you get these kind of spiritual messages. Maybe I lit a light for him, I'm not sure. And from there, I shared previously also that I had different experience or phenomena going on with light and rainbows that I was seeing a lot of, which made me come to the conclusion that we are light. He's with light, and he is light. And he did his job. He learned to die while he was living, and he let go of the attachments, and he died in hospice. So I'm not sure who was surrounding him, or with him, I'm not sure. But he was a very private person. But anyway, those are some things to consider and know about preparing to die while you live, even though not really necessarily giving up your love or your experiences with your loved ones. You really can't physically take that with you. And we're so human and so used to the physical form, we forget about the spiritual aspect of who we actually really are. So I thought that was very important to mention and consider and marinate on it. So you may be asking, and like I mentioned before, what happens when you die? What happens when you die? What happens when I die? What happens when they die? What happens? Like I mentioned before, I don't know. But one thing I'm almost intuitively very sure of is that when we die, we return to the same place that we were born, period. Whether we remember where that is or not, I think we get hints along the way while we're on this physical form. We get hints. And it's up to us to continue on this physical realm to learn the lessons and get the essence of who we really are before we return back to where we are from this dream state. So, well, it's not really, well, it sort of is in essence with the words of dream, because sleep in that dream state is the cousin of death, but not really sure. So as you know, Indy is a distant, not a distant cousin, but a very immediate family member of death itself. So where we return to is the same place we were born from, and where we were born from probably many, many times before. As I mentioned before, even though I don't think it's on this YouTube channel, is that one day I was looking at the sun, and it was a very interesting experience. It almost scared me, but it's like I can see the sun under a microscope. I've seen it 2 or 3 times, and I got the same experience. But when I looked into the sun, I saw people. Not necessarily they were the same color as the sun, but I can see human form, so to speak, and I can feel life forms. And it was like on earth, but it was in the sun, but it was life there. You can see human figures, and they were happy and joyful, and it was blissful. And I was like, wow, is that really where we return to and where we are born from? Perhaps, I'm not sure. But anyway, I just wanted to come forth and just start the conversation about death, and not fearing death, but learning to die while we live. Not necessarily not living life, but being comfortable with the terms of death and what it has to offer for us as a human, where we all come from, where we were born from, and where we return, and perhaps be born again. I'm not sure. I don't know. Anyway, that's my theory. That's my thought. That's my intuition. Anyway, thanks for visiting the city. I hope this sparked an interest. I hope it was helpful in a sense as to understanding what death is and how it relates to all of us. All of us has that appointment. Will you make it? Anyway, thanks for visiting the city. Take care.